Hey, I'm James from Armchair Warlords.com, and this is Chapter 5 of our Pathfinder series, How to Pick Skills for a Character. So the first thing you need to figure out is how many skill ranks your character has. This is going to be based on your class and your intelligence score modifier, which if you've watched our previous videos, you should already know how to calculate those, so you should have a number in mind. And once you figured that out, you can go to either the class description in the classes chapter, or you can come to this useful table in the skills section and figure out which of your skills are class skills. Now, Pathfinder has improved on the D20 system a bit with the skills by simplifying class skills and the bonuses you get for those. So with a class skill, all that means is that you can add a +3 bonus to the skill if you put any ranks in it. So figure out which ones are your class skills and mark those on your character sheet. That's the first step. Once you've done that, you need to start looking at which skills you want to actually invest ranks in. Now, most characters are going to have anywhere from 2 to about 10 skill points, depending on which class they are and whether or not they have an intelligence bonus. So the skills are pretty self-explanatory just from their name, and if that's not good enough, or if you're not sure what all that entails, there are a pretty detailed description in the books of what every skill does and what kind of checks you can make with that skill. There are useful tables that tell you what potential situational modifiers can be applied to any of those skills while you're making a check, such as with acrobatics here we have trying to cross a thin surface. It gives you pluses and minuses or difficulty classes based on how wide the surface is. Alright, so I'll go through the skills very quickly, just to give you an idea of what they're useful for. The acrobatics skill, this is going to be something that you use whenever you try to do something hard, hard agility-wise, such as tumbling or walking across a tightrope or something like that. It's very useful for agile players and players who are going to be trying to perform difficult gymnastic-style feats like scaling ledges, or walking tight ropes, or jumping between buildings, or trying to maneuver and dodge around a lot in a fight. Your appraise skill is useful for bartering and for figuring out whether or not treasure that you find is useful, especially if you're playing in a group that likes to keep track of weight encumbrances and that type of thing. If you're having to triage heavy items, then appraise can help you know which is the most valuable item that you want to hold on to. Your bluff skills used for telling lies, and it's not just for telling big long lies in the middle of a conversation, but it's more for giving a quick short lie that'll get you past someone who's trying to obstruct your completion of a task. So if you want to bluff your way past a guard who doesn't want to let you through, or if you want to trick someone into giving you some assistance when they're really should be your enemy. The climb skill is self-explanatory. It's used for climbing. It gets harder, obviously, when you try to climb more vertical surfaces, or try to climb without assistance, or when a surface is slippery or difficult to get traction on. Your craft skill is one that usually doesn't see a lot of use inside of a game, because this is more for crafting mundane items or non-magical items. You can use it for crafting anything from baskets to more complex things like swords or pieces of armor. You typically have to specialize when you take this skill, which is why there are several sections for it on a character sheet, because you can take a skill multiple times and apply a different crafting specialty every time. Diplomacy, this is the skill you use when you're trying to negotiate agreements or when you're trying to make peace with someone who's potentially hostile to you. Disable device skills used for disarming traps or disabling complex mechanisms that may be preventing you from progressing. Your disguise skill, this is going to be useful for your rogue type characters that may need to infiltrate an enemy area and pretend to be someone that they're not. And escape artist is one that you're going to use when you're trying to escape bindings, or when you're trying to wiggle your way out of manacles, or perhaps get out from under someone who's pinning you down. Your fly skill, this is usually only going to be for characters that have the ability to make themselves fly by magic, or for your occasional very rare winged character who can fly naturally. It's going to be used whenever you try to execute some type of complex maneuver while you're airborne. Your handle animal skills used for convincing animals either to stop being hostile towards you or to teach them tricks or train them to do specific things, like teaching a dog to guard your house. Your heal skill is going to be used to perform first aid. It's not used to regenerate hit points or to restore hit points from injury or anything like that on an instant basis. It's more for long-term care or for throwing a splint on a broken leg or something like that. Something that's going to give you a quick fix and allow you to continue moving or to continue on your adventure without having to stop. Your intimidate skill is kind of similar to the diplomacy skill, except it's very specific. You use this to punk someone down or to bully them into letting you do something that they wouldn't normally do. Your knowledge skills, and there are a bunch of them as you can see, these are skills that test how much obscure knowledge your character has about specific topics. So if you're rolling through a dungeon and you see a strange carving, you can use one of your knowledge skills, such as knowledge of architecture or knowledge of history, to perhaps roll a die and have the game master tell you about that object, so he can give you the history of it or tell you what religion it possibly represents, or maybe who carved it and why. It's really a measure of knowledge that your character should have but your player doesn't. So it's usually very game specific or very setting specific. Characters that rely on this type of thing, like wizards and bards, are going to want to take several of these knowledge skills, whereas most other characters usually will only have one. Your linguistic skill, you throw ranks into this skill to learn additional languages. Most people never have more than a couple of ranks in this skill, because what it does is allow them to learn and speak another language. And also, unlike the original D20 system, they've lumped forging into this as well. So if you want to forge a document, you need to have ranks in the linguistic skills, because you're going to check that when you perform the forgery. The perception skill has lumped in your senses for your awareness of your environment. So sight, hearing, smell, taste, feel, that's all lumped into a single category called perception. This is what you're going to roll when you're attempting to detect the presence of something that is not immediately visible to you. Most often, if you're playing with a good game master anyway, he's going to roll these in secret, because if you don't succeed at it, then he's not even going to tell you that something's there. And when you're playing the game, if the DM tells you, oh, I want you to roll a perception check, then whether you pass or fail, you're already aware that there's something you should be looking for. So a good game master is going to roll these himself, and he's only going to tell you that something's there if one of you happens to succeed on the roll. Your perform skill, this is for things like singing and dancing and playing an instrument. This is something that bards are going to be wanting to throw some of their ranks in, because the higher you have, or the higher this skill is, the more convincing or the more entertaining your performance is going to be. Your profession skill, like the craft skill, has several categories where you can fill in different specialties. Now, professions are more complex than crafts. These are things, instead of making something with your hands, you're performing a skill or providing a service. This is instead of a basket weaver being a craft user, a profession user is going to be more like a lawyer or a judge, or someone who provides some other type of intangible service. So it might be a scribe or a groom or something like that. Something you can do that's not necessarily constructing something with your hands. Your ride skill, this is going to be checked whenever you try to perform complex actions while riding an animal or riding a vehicle. So if you're galloping along on your horse and you want to try to leap off the horse and perform an attack as you hit the ground, you're going to make a ride skill to make sure that you don't just fall off the saddle and bust your face open on the ground. Sense motive, this is for detecting falsehoods or detecting someone's true intentions just through conversation. So if someone comes up to you and tries to tell you a lie, you would have this skill check to determine how well you are spotting the fact that they're deceiving you. You're not necessarily going to know what they're lying about or what the lie is, but the intention of the skill is to determine your ability to detect falsehoods. So just like perception, this is going to be a skill that good GMs are going to roll in secret, because they're not going to tell you through the conversation with the NPC that the person's actually, or that you need to check and see if the person's lying, because if they do, whether you pass or fail, the character, or the player rather, already knows in their mind that the NPC they're talking to is withholding information. So that's something your GM is going to want to check behind his screen. Your sleight of hand skills for things that require fine motor function, something that is like cutting a purse or picking a pocket. It's can also be used for opening locks. Depending on your GM, some GMs use disable device, some GMs use sleight of hand for picking locks. It really doesn't matter either way. You should invest ranks in both if you're a rogue or infiltrator type character, because either one of them is going to come into play at some point, and you're going to need both. Your spellcraft, this is for your casting classes, and it's a measure of their knowledge of the art of using magic, or the art of how magic applies to the world around them, or how it applies to specific instances. So a lot of wizards, for instance, can walk into a room, check their spellcraft, and determine if a spell has been cast in the area recently just by looking at the effects of it. Such as if they see scorch marks on the ground, they can check their spellcraft to see if it was created by a magical fireball or if it was just a natural fire. One of the other things it's used for is determining whether or not a wizard can learn new spells. So he checks his spellcraft, and if he succeeds on spellcraft, then he's been able to copy the new spell into his spellbook and use it for himself. Your stealth skill, unlike the original D20 system, Pathfinder lumped hide and move silently into a single skill called stealth. And this is a self-explanatory measure of how well your character can sneak around without being seen or heard or detected in any way. Survival is a skill that covers your ability to take care of yourself in a strange or wild environment, your ability to find food in a forest, or to find water in a desert, or to make a camp in a hostile environment. Your swim skill is obviously just a check of how well you can swim. Most often GMs are only going to make you check this if you're trying to swim against a current, or trying to perform a complex action while in water that's over your head so your feet are off the ground. Something that is beyond just normal wading across a deep water area or swimming straight forward. And lastly, your use magic device skill. This is going to be checked whenever a character who has no magical ability attempts to use a magic item. So when your rogue character who's stolen a wand wants to try to point that wand at someone and actually cast a harmful spell from it, he'll have to make a use magic device check to make sure that his lack of understanding didn't cause that item to blow up in his face. So now that you know what these skills are, you can use the book and use the brief descriptions I just gave you to try to pick the skills that you think will be useful to your character. Always remember, you don't get a lot of skill points. They're pretty sparing in the game, so make sure you make good decisions and only pick the skills that you think you're going to be checking on a regular basis. And also remember that there is a difference between trained and untrained skills. It's not always a good idea to spend points in a skill that you can use untrained, because if you've got a decent ability score modifier, then you're going to be rolling pretty good with that skill anyway, so there's no point in dumping 2 or 3 of your very precious skill points into that. And thank you very much for watching. I'm James Coker, an Armchair Warlord.